fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, Mr. Joe Goldberg. So it's back in the chair, back from holiday.
I'm out of practice. I was looking at this going, how do I do this? I've lost my edge, but now I'm going to use you to bring me back, to sharpen me up again, Al.
Edge.
Sharpen me.
You had an edge?
I have no edge. I'm as dull. I'm dull.
Dull.
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. He's so dull that it'll cut you. Well, anyway, so speaking of an edge, we've got a great writer. He's got a lot of good books out, and he's got a new one, Sleepless City, a Nick Ryan novel, and it's the Nick Ryan series, book 1. So, Mr. Reed Farrel Coleman, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Reed, wow, you really take this writing seriously. What got you into writing? Like, what was it that made you go this direction after your career?
Let's see. It's the only thing I do well. And there's some debate as to that. No, I started writing poetry when I was 12 years old. I was published by the time I was 15. In fact, I think I'm the only person I've ever met or know who quit the football team to become the editor of the literary magazine in school. So, I guess I was headed down this road whether I wanted to be here or not.
It's probably a good bet.
What did you do for a career, actually, before you got into writing like these types of books?
Well, lots of things, but
right.
My major focus was I worked at the cargo area at Kennedy Airport for 5 years. And I first started that job at the World Trade Center, and then got transferred because nobody could take me in the office. They transferred me to the cargo area at Kennedy Airport. And I did export for a large a French freight forwarding company. And what's a freight forwarder is a travel agent for inanimate objects. And if you've ever seen Goodfellas, those are the people I work with.
That you must have learned a lot going through that experience. You must have seen a lot of things that you didn't plan on seeing. There must have been a lot of surprises.
Oh, you could say that. It was a very interesting education, the kind of which you don't get in college. Our warehouse manager used to carry a ivory handled 45. On Fridays, when things would get really frustrating, he would take the warehouse shotgun and fire it into the corrugated steel bay doors and make us all dive for cover. Then those were the good days.
Wow, hate to see the bad day.
Oh yeah,
this is all really it's fascinating. But again, I always sort of, was there a certain thing, even though you've written poetry as a youngster and you did well with it, is there a certain thing that made you actually want to write these action thriller books for a living?
Yeah. I oddly enough, when I was working at the airport, I used to have to go from JFK, which is in Queens, to meetings in Manhattan once a week. And there were several hours to kill in between. And so I went back to Brooklyn College and took a night class. And the only night class that appealed to me at all was a class called American Detective Fiction. Now, here's the weird thing. I was never a mystery reader. Like, to me, mystery novels were those cheesy books on my dad's nightstand with the lurid covers of half-naked women holding guns. So that stuff didn't appeal to me. I was more of a sci-fi reader, a literary reader. But I took this class, and the first 3 novels we read were The Continental Op and The Maltese Falcon by Hammett. and Farewell, My Lovely by Chandler. And this is true. And if my wife was here, she'd testify to it. I came home that night after we finished discussing Farewell, My Lovely, and I said, I want to quit my job because this is what I was meant to do. I was meant to write detective novels.
So did you use those experiences that you had on the docks when you made that decision to build your characters?
No, actually, I've never written a book about the airport. Strangely enough, it was more, my thing is not so much trying to retell stories or things that happened to me. Cops always say I get them right when I write them in books, but I very seldom repeat cop stories. Cops will tell you endless stories. It's getting people's attitudes that make my characters real. And so I take people's attitudes. That's the part I use, is how people see the world.
So when you put together a book like this now it's the Nick Ryan series, and this is the first book. Have you got this all sort of planned out? Have you got like 3 or 4 or 5 books in your mind kind of mapped out of where you want Nick Ryan to begin and how you want it to end, and then you're filling it in as you go? Or is this just one at a time and you come and go as it comes and goes?
It's not even one at a time. I'm renowned as a total seat of my pants writer. I never outline, I never plan in advance. For me, what makes writing fun, and you've interviewed writers all over the places, it's a hard job. I mean, it's not hard like when I drove an oil truck in sub-zero weather. That's hard, but it's difficult to write a 300-page book. And what makes it fun for me is not knowing, not planning. So my theory has always been, if I'm not sure what's coming next, the reader will be excited by it the same way I'm excited by it. So the shorter answer is, I never plan ahead, no.
Well, let's take that. You never plan ahead as you're writing the book, but your characters are so strong, your character-driven books. Do you know them before you start your book?
I learn them as I write them.
Really?
I have an idea. I have an idea of who they are. All of my protagonists, and that is what I'm known for, as the strength of my protagonists, is I learn about them as I put them in situations. I have a writer friend, Peter Spiegelman, an award-winning writer, who has always said, setting is the soil in which you grow your plot, your characters, and whatever. So I have a germ of an idea for who my character is. With Nick, I had a better idea than I usually do. And you put him in a setting, and the setting is New York, and let him go. And I let my mind go wherever it wants to go. And it's fun for me that way.
Do they surprise you as you're writing them?
They absolutely do. I am one of those writers who believes that characters, sometimes characters you try to get rid of won't let you. Or characters you want to take in certain directions, they go, you're not taking me there, or you should take me here. I listen to my characters.
So how do you experience them? Is it like an audio in your head, or do you see like pictures? What's your experience like when you're doing a book with Nick Ryan, for instance?
Yeah, I hear their voices, actually. Voice is one of the things that is a foundational element of a character for me, as I imagine their voices. And sometimes I will actually do their voices, which why my wife has threatened to have me locked away at times, hearing voices coming out of the office that aren't necessarily mine. So yeah, it's auditory. I hear them before I see them.
Well, they don't let you drive, do they, when you're hearing these voices?
No. Unless I take my Thorazine. No, it's a very interesting experience. You guys talk to writers all the time. So, and we all do it a little bit differently from each other. But for some people, it's visual. I know a lot of writers who have to basically create a bio for their characters before they start writing, down to cutting out pictures in magazines of what they think their characters look like.
Well, let me ask you the second thing of characters in your book, because I feel when I read your stuff is that setting is a major character for you, or the surroundings. New York City and the area is a character for you. Am I misreading it?
Oh, absolutely not. I'll go back to Peter's quote about setting is the soil on which you grow your book. It absolutely is. Now, I've written a lot of protagonists who live in and around New York City, but they're always very different New York cities from each other. Like the New York City that Nick lives in is a very varied city. That was a world I enjoyed building because Nick is, although he's an undercover New York City detective from Brooklyn, he has dated for a long time a woman who lives on the Upper East Side of New York, a wealthy, powerful woman who's lived on the Upper East Side of New York. So as the story advances, somebody says to Nick when he's offered this special job, we are going to need somebody who also knows the difference between a salad fork and a dinner fork. So on the one hand, Nick might one day be working in the grit between the city's fingernails, and on the next day be in a Sutton Place apartment with a view of the 59th Street Bridge.
That's how you build your character as you're writing them, as they move around these different locations.
Yeah, and also secondary characters have a lot to do with building your protagonist. For me,
that was my next question. You hit me. The secondary characters play a role in bringing out the elements of obviously your main character. I almost see a sort of a Kirk, Spock, McCoy thing. They kind of bring out these different elements of your main character.
Yeah, the secondary characters has always been crucial to me, and I never call them minor characters. Nobody in my books runs on stage and screams, "Hark, I hear the cannons roar," and then walks off stage. To me, secondary characters have full lives, even if they're on the page for one paragraph. When I imagine them having full lives. And the way I used to exemplify this to my writing students was I would ask them if on the way to class, if they had driven by anybody walking their dog. And most people, when they're driving, and if you drive for any length of time, you'll drive by somebody walking their dog. So I said, that person walking their dog and their dog are minor characters in your life. But guess what? You're a minor character in their life. So I always imagine both sides of things. So no one is ever a minor character, though there are sometimes secondary characters.
Right. There was a woman every morning with a guy walking her dog by me, going the opposite direction every morning. And then I would pass her going back and she would be alone. And then I realized that what she was doing is this guy was walking down to her place. She was having an affair with him, and then she'd go out with the dog and walk. He had to park up the hill. So, yeah, they have very important things. They have a whole other life going on.
Right. Their lives are their lives, but we see them as, flashes. But we're flashes to them. I wonder what she thought about you.
About whether I was going to tell one of her neighbors what was going on. You know what I mean? So I love getting ideas like that. I love being around people like that and picking up things. And you can go with your imagination as far as you want with something like that. But I find that really, really kind of the fun thing about it. So when you do this and you're putting it together, I guess you find the story can change quite a bit as the characters grow.
Yeah, it's funny is I despise, people who say, well, it works organically, but I have no other word to describe it, but it's organic. I pick the setting. I have a germ of an idea of the character. What that character does is based on that germ of the character and where he is and who his friends are and who his enemies are. And then that suggests plot to me. If you've read the book, it's got a fairly interesting and intricate plot, and that just came as I wrote it. I did not plan any of that out.
Wow. So if you don't plan it out, do you actually have an element or some sort of theme that you want a reader to take out of or find in the book besides the action?
Yes, buy this book.
Be entertained. Give me your money.
I've always said, and whenever I teach classes, I tell this to writers who, have this lofty idea of what writing is a writer's first job is to entertain the reader. So that is always in the front of my mind. It has to interest me, but it also has to be sellable. People have to want to keep turning the pages. Otherwise, what are you doing? So entertainment is job one for a writer, and particularly a genre writer. Otherwise, what are they doing?
Hard-boiled. What is hard-boiled for you? Like how hard-boiled do you get?
Oh, I leave the egg in for 10 minutes.
All right.
No, I can be very hard-boiled, and very gritty. And it depends on the book. It depends on the character. Obviously the Sleepless City is pretty hard-boiled, and pretty noir. And please don't ask me to define those two phrases, because we could do an hour just on that.
So description, it's important to kind of show as well. So where do you get your influences from then? Where's the inspiration come from?
LSD.
Perfect.
Well done.
Yeah. I think Joe's that way too.
Yeah.
Drive.
No, it's an easier question to answer where I don't get inspiration or ideas from. Whenever I'm asked at a book signing where I get my ideas from, I kind of paraphrase Stephen King and say, from a post office box in Schenectady. There's very little in the world or in a newspaper or watching TV that doesn't somehow stimulate an idea to me. Sometimes it's a phrase that I hear or a phrase I think of, and that just gets me going.
You ever, as you're writing your noir, your hard-boiledness, say, ooh, I better not write that because the reader or the society is going to not like that? Do you cancel yourself, I guess is the lousy way to put it?
Well, we all edit ourselves, and we all have to pay attention or not to the context in the world we live in. In earlier books, I had used the N-word appropriately in context. If a white supremacist is not going to scream, "Hey, you N-word," right? But now context with that word seems not to matter. So, yes, the short answer is I don't like that. I don't believe in censorship. But the fact is you have to pay attention to the world you're in and the context in which you're writing. So sadly, the answer to that question is yes.
When you take on a series like this, now you've taken this series on, so you're doing it by the seat of your pants. Where do you think you're going to end up? How far do you go? Like what determines if a book 2 or 3 or how far it goes, other than sales?
Yeah, well, let's go back, Al. Rewind.
No, but I mean,
sell books.
But is that you say that, and of course it's important to sell books. You got to have readers, and it keeps everybody in business. That's all true. But you yourself, in your mind, let's say it sells well, and it's fine. It's like is there a limit? Is what I'm saying. Like do you ever cap something?
I have capped books. My Mo Prager series, I wrote 9 books in the Mo Prager series. And because I had nothing else to say, and I had aged Mo through the series. When he started, he was in his mid-30s. By the end of the series, he was 65. And I never wanted to turn him into the Al Takaka detective, down in Boca Raton, chasing people's scooters and hearing aids. By the end of the series, I said, the only thing Mo could flash with any confidence was his ARP card. So I naturally, Mo kind of aged out of that series, kind of aged itself out. Nick, I've set up the world for Nick that could go on, 10 books, but it all does truly depend on sales. So you have to be I could have all the lofty dreams of 10 or a 20 book series. If it doesn't sell, it doesn't matter. So let's sell those books.
So let's ask a question then about the craft to be able to sell those books. Rewinding back to craft I'm going to ask the question I'm sure you've been asked 1,000 times, but I got to do it. Is the poetry to crime writing difference from the idea of how you use words?
It's a good question. It's not one of those questions you're asked a million times and you don't like answering. It's a good question because it's not easy to answer. I'll put it this way. I have been described as a hard-boiled poet or the Noir poet laureate. Those are great titles to have. They are, and I wear them proudly. But they're double-edged sword. As you know, I'm friendly with Lee Child, and he once said to me, "I love your writing, but Reed, if you cut 3 words out of every sentence, you'd be a huge seller."
Right.
So in some ways, we write how we write. But what I try not to do is to never condescend to my audience. So while I don't write at a 3rd grade level, I also try not to be, look how smart I am or look how clever I am. And as I've written more and more books, I've also discovered that different readers read for different reasons. So that some readers just want to go along for the ride. They don't want to guess what happens. They just want to be entertained. So I have to write on different levels. So there are those readers. And then there are readers who try to guess what's coming. Like me, I love that. I love to guess what's coming. And there are people who read it for the deeper meaning, the latent content in it. So it's an interesting challenge because I'm trying to write for 3 or 4 different types of readers. And I guess I'm doing it okay because Sleepless City is my 32nd published novel.
Well, you say Sleepless City. I want to complete this with titles. I mean, your titles are important, and it seems like Sleepless City has more than one meaning behind it. Am I?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is on the one hand an allusion to, of course, the city that never sleeps. But it's also an allusion to, we've all suffered from occasional bouts of insomnia, right? And that it's different from voluntarily not sleeping and having a great time. And insomnia is very edgy because you know what it feels like when you can't shut your eyes and you can't go to sleep. So it's a kind of double-edged thing. It's a city that is, I could have called the book Restless City. So there's the sleeplessness and the restlessness and the tension in the sleeplessness. But that was always the title from day one, Sleepless City. In fact, I had the title before I started writing the book.
So violence on the page, how do you handle that these days?
With a knife.
Perfect. Lots of blood on that face. Yeah. No, I
try to be realistic without being gory is the short answer. I mean, some people enjoy gore. I don't particularly enjoy it. But on the other hand, I don't like soft-selling violence because I think that does a real disservice to things. As an example, when I did some research traveling with my son, and he had never fired a gun before. So I took him to a gun range in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I happen to be right now. And he fired a 9mm and a .357 Magnum. And the look on his face and what he said to me was, how does anybody ever survive this? So that reaction my son had is kind of the reaction I want readers to have is, God, violence is terrible, but it happens. And how does anybody live through it? And I want that readers to ask themselves that question.
Well, you mentioned a word there that I had written down myself just before you started to speak, which is research. If you're writing from, if you're pantsing it, how do you research? What do you research?
I try to limit my research severely because most of what I'm mining is my own emotions. you can see how other people react, but you can never really know how other people feel. So I always say that if you feel my characters are very human, it's because I'm mining the depths of my own emotions and all the possibilities. I remember how I felt about X, and I extrapolate it and to say, how would Nick feel in that situation? Like, I'm sure if you've looked, you know that when I was 15 years old, I watched somebody die of a gunshot wound 10 feet in front of me. And that's always stuck with me. So, I'm sorry that gentleman was murdered, but that experience has helped me be a better writer. I would give it all back to give that guy back his life, but obviously, the universe just doesn't work that way.
Do you have problems writing, or or I shouldn't say it that way, but how is...
Do I get writer's block?
No.
32 books.
Yeah, I would imagine, but isn't there times that okay, let's put it this way. There are times that you just don't feel like writing.
Yes, every day.
So do you find it's kind of a force?
There are times when you don't feel like doing your job.
Well, every day.
Yeah.
No, but is there a forced thing to it, is what I'm saying. I mean, when you sit down, you've got a book and you're going to start on it, or you've started on it, is there times that it just doesn't happen, doesn't flow?
Oh, absolutely. I have this whole talk I do about writer's block. I always say the lawyers go into the courtroom and say, I have jurisprudence block. The garbage men say, I have garbage can block. No, we all have bad days when either nothing comes out or what comes out is really bad, right? We all have days like that. So I don't have this romantic vision of being a writer that, other people do. It's my job. It's my career. It's how I make money. So on those days when I don't feel like doing it, I force myself to do it. Sometimes you can't tell whether I was in a bad mood or not, and sometimes you can. And on those days, I don't include what I wrote on those days when I don't think it lives up to the standard.
Well, they say that, and you said it, I know you have, writers write, you said it in this interview, but they always say writers read. What do you read? Do you read inside the genre, or do you read outside, or nothing?
I'm always amazed when, new writers will come up to me and they say, I want to write a book. And I say, well, who do you read? And they go, I don't read. I go, that's pretty interesting. I can't wait to see that book.
It'll be about nothing.
No, there are writers. First of all, I have to say this because I've been in that category too. There are great writers that no one's ever heard of. And everybody, sure, we love Michael Connelly, a friend of mine. I love Lee Child, love Megan Abbott. There are a whole list of writers I love, but there's twice as many writers who are very good, or as good as any of those people are. And I always want readers to give those people a chance. The next time you're in a bookstore, don't go to only your favorites, right? Try somebody else. And with the internet, you can, look, when you buy it on Amazon, there are recommended books below, right? Try one of them. And I read, widely, mostly crime fiction these days. And I mentioned two people who are favorites of mine, Michael Connelly and Megan Abbott. I look forward to their books. I used to love Philip Kerr. I loved his books, but he passed away a few years ago.
Yeah.
So, I also, and I read a lot of books for blurbs, and, discover new writers that way. But I read the paper every day. And that's a good place for crime writers to start reading papers.
Yeah, there's lots of action there.
Well, do you have a list of Reed's recommended people you should read who are not on the front page?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some names you probably don't know.
Pencils up.
I mentioned one, Peter Spiegelman, who I think is an unbelievable writer who's never gotten the attention he deserves. S.J. Roseanne is a woman. Shira Rozan, Rozan.
Yeah.
She's won the Edgar Award 2 or 3 times, but that doesn't mean anyone really knows who she is. She's a great writer.
Yeah, she's been on the show a couple of times.
Yeah, she's great. I love SJ. She was kind of my mentor. Peter Blauner, Charles Salzberg, Mike Wiley, Matt Goldman. There's so many writers who are so good, who even sell well, but that people should discover.
Joe Goldberg.
Yeah.
Matt Goldman.
Yeah.
And you too.
Yeah. And what's his name?
And what's his
and that check is still in the mail.
Yeah,
Right, exactly. $60.
Yeah. Hold on to that.
Yeah.
You might need it. When you're writing characters, when you go to write an evil character or a bad character, someone that's doing something wrong, like, obviously it comes with territory. How do you get into that mindset?
Oh, that's easier for me.
Oh, you like that better, do you? Yeah.
No, it's more fun. They're in some ways they're more fun. I don't have problems with that. It's because I've always been one of those people who believes, and this is personal belief, that you don't know what you're capable of unless you're given. It's easy to say I would never do that until you're put in a situation where you have to make that choice. Would you do that? I've always been interested to see, people who take the high moral ground. If they didn't sleep or eat for 3 days, what they would be capable of. So it's easy for me to imagine even good people doing bad things.
Right. So you actually dress up and go out in the streets at night and take on this role.
Who says dress up?
Well, you didn't want to get recognized. I thought you could put on a gray-haired wig, look like Joe.
Or I could go out naked and make everybody avert their eyes.
So Al would be right there.
Yeah, that's it. I'd be lined up.
Just tell me what day and what corner.
Yeah, that's right. You're throwing the money. Okay, so how much of you is in the main character?
In Nick, not much.
Not much.
In Nick.
No.
Not much in Nick. In my Mo Prager, Mo was essentially, I've always said, he's a better looking, braver, somewhat less intelligent version of me. But basically my other characters, of course, there are some aspects of them that have to be part of me because who am I mining for their emotions is me. And because I'm writing them. So, unconsciously parts of me are them, but Nick is very far away from who I am.
Well, you talked about character and the like, and you say you don't have any themes. It's entertainment, but I feel like there's always sort of a right versus wrong. Like the person who don't eat for 3 days, you have to decide right versus wrong. Is that sort of what runs through a lot of your characters?
I think that is the underlying theme of almost every crime book. And I never start out with a theme, right? I always think books that are written because of themes are deadly boring because you're writing to make a point, right? That's what nonfiction is for. Fiction is not to make a point. That doesn't mean the books don't have themes. In fact, I find themes appear in retrospect to me. Like, gee, I must have been writing this book about, how crime reverberates, violent crime in the past reverberates into the future. I didn't sit down and say, there's a book called The James Deans, right? That was my fourth Mo book. And it's about X, Y, or Z. And I only realized after I wrote it what the themes of that book was. And it took that book for me to realize themes are there, but they don't think about them when I write.
Right. So the themes kind of come out organically.
Yeah. Oh, there's that word. There's that word again. Yes. I guess if I was a farmer, I'd be an organic farmer.
An organic farmer. Well, how does each one of these books change you?
Every book I write makes me a better writer, for one thing. And watching people's reactions to it changes me. And since I've written X amount of things that have now happened to Nick, Nick changes, right? Nick can't, as we all do, let us say, remember the first really terrible loss you suffered in your life? It doesn't matter who it is. It could be a pet. It could be a parent. It could be whomever. That changes you. So having written the things that happened to Nick in this book changed Nick, and hence change me as his writer, because I don't want to repeat the things that have happened, but also the things that happen in this book have to change Nick, and hence change me as his creator.
Nick is transitioning into Jack.
Jack, yes. And soon his last name will be Reacher, and he'll
be bigger and
he'll be bigger,
stronger guy. Yeah,
right.
You said you become a better writer for each book, and you hear that. How many books are in the I started but didn't finish read Coleman pile?
None.
None.
Okay. If I start a book, I generally finish it, though I have regretted doing that on 3 or 4 occasions. So I have 32 published novels. And I have written in the pandemic and post-pandemic 3.5 more books. So those, I'm pretty sure all of them will be published. But it mixed in amongst the first 32 were three or 4 books that didn't get published.
When big things like that happen, the pandemic, and you look at the behavior of people, you learn a lot, because there's a lot of surprises and sometimes there isn't. So when you go over the last couple of years, however you see the pandemic, there must be surprises of the way people acted and behaved and what people say and don't do and all this stuff. Does that affect on how you decide to write your characters in fiction?
Well, I have to say that there were events that happened now this book was finished right before the pandemic started. And then things happened during the pandemic, which made me rewrite and add to the book. So they are not directly related to the pandemic, but things that happened in the world during the pandemic. Actually, and that's the first time that's ever happened to me. I have never changed the book or added to a book because of something that happened in the real world until Sleepless City. And when you read the book, you'll see, people will know immediately what changed. I don't want to give it away, but it will be obvious to any reader what changed. And I avoided, like the plague, writing about the pandemic. Like a lot of writers came to me, or we discussed, well, would you include the pandemic? And to me, writing about the pandemic, people were writing about the pandemic during the pandemic, and went to their agents and said, "Here's my pandemic book," and people don't want to read about what they just lived through. When 9/11 happened, there still are no really successful 9/11 books because no one wants to relive that. We're not far enough away. It's not, Pearl Harbor. Did anybody want to read about Pearl Harbor the week after Pearl Harbor? So I avoided doing that, and I advised other writers not to write about the pandemic.
Or you avoid the plague like the plague.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
You caught that.
I mean, nonfiction, people will be interested in nonfiction books about it, but as terms of fiction, we all live through it. Why do you want to read about it?
Because there's no escape in something like that, or there's no, because I do nonfiction books. I do those boring books. I've done 30 of them. And I don't get to choose how my characters, their behaviors and how they turn out. It's kind of as is. And I've got to, I write about it. So you get to choose how this series goes and what happens to the different characters in a sense. At the end of it, you can make sure there's a certain amount of justice in time. So that must be kind of liberating about writing in fiction.
Well, it's funny is what my books are known for are moral dilemmas. So I'm not one of those people who, when you get to the end of the book, you feel like justice is restored or balance is restored. when you get to the ends of my books, your head should spin. Like, what would I have done in that situation? So actually, I try to make moral questions as entertaining as I can, but justice is not restored. Do you know Turner Classic Movies?
Right, of course. Yeah.
Right? You know Eddie Muller?
Yeah.
So Eddie once said, we were once going to do a panel together, and it was a noir panel. And I said, Eddie, I'm hard boiled. I'm not really noir. And he said to me, Reed, you're out of your mind. Your books are so noir because the truth makes things worse in your book.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not one of those guys who balances the scale of justice at the end of a book. The things may get solved. The bad person may get caught. But what does that really do? I don't believe in closure. So, my books are not about restoring balance to the world.
No, keeping it real. Reed, are you a social media person? Are you sprouting around on TikTok or places, or do you have a website?
No.
Where
Reds.
Facebook.
How do people find you? Just Facebook?
Facebook, and I have a website, reedcoleman.com. I do have someone who tweets for me, and I do have an Instagram account. It's just like I'm an old person, and it's just not for me. And I'd like to rather spend my time writing than looking of. Do you know Bo Burnham?
Sure.
Have you ever heard of Bo Burnham?
Absolutely.
Yeah. He has this great song called White Woman's Instagram. And, it's a listing of all the wacky things you'll see, like on an Instagram account. It's also a very touching song. And I would highly recommend it. If you don't know it, listen to it. But that's just not who I am. I mean, I'm a good person to meet. I'm a fun person to be around, but I don't want to waste my time on social media.
Oh, I don't blame you. Oh, so what's your website so we can put it up for people?
reedcoleman.com.
Well, it's easy. Well, great.
It's easy.
Well,
like me.
Yeah. Well, the C's easy on the street. We've got it all.
Yes. Right. Averting your eyes.
Yeah. There you go.
Dude, man, it must be Reed Coleman. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you being here. Now, the book, Sleepless City. It's a Nick Ryan novel, and it's from the Nick Ryan series, Book 1. So the guest is the writer, Reed Farrel Coleman. So thank you for being here.
Oh, this is great fun, guys. And you told me I could be on for 3 hours.
Well, you can stay on, but,
No extra pay. No extra pay.
Right. Oh, yeah, that check is still in the mail. Guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.